said that, but that's like Dutch films. The problem is it's like on YouTube. It's like identity commitment to come out films with it's completely different. And I sort of say,
right, we're just maybe minutes away, or a minute away from the technical. There we go. Brilliant. Right, guys, if anyone wants to feel they can come a bit closer in, just because I've had a bit of a sore throat recently. That's great, thank you so much. Sorry about that, I'm a little bit flustered. So there's a little bit of a structure for this session. And the way the structure is going to be is, first I'm going to introduce the concept, or my concepts of thinking backwards. And then we're going to look at 6 secular issues or topics. And then there's going to be some time for Q&A. And then there's going to be 4 topics which are related to Judaism. And then we'll do the same sort of thing. So I guess to kick off with, what do I mean by thinking backwards, contrarianism or counterintuitive thinking? I've done this session once before, and something that sometimes pops up is the idea of being contrarian for contrarian's sake. And that, the real thing that I wanted to outline and define is that I guess it's more about the way I look at things, and I look at it in terms of what I'm calling performance contrarianism, and that is applying contrarian or counterintuitive thinking for better performance. So it's only when one's performance can be improved in terms of efficiency, speed, etc., rather than being contrarian for contrarian's sake. So that's the sort of main point that I wanted to make sure, because I'm not contrarian with everything. It's just with things that, in ways I think it's most relevant. So I'm going to go through some topics of those. So getting into it now in terms of the 6 topics. The first one, appropriately enough, is called First Impressions. So the topic is called First Impressions. First impressions count a lot. So we're constantly told that first impressions mean a lot, and for better or worse, there are circumstances where that is very true. These include time-sensitive circumstances such as interviews or dates. But if you're in a deciding seat, the interviewer, or have to make a decision regarding a potential date, for example, what do? Invariably, you go back to your first impression, your gut. But why? In many cases, we're told that trusting the guts, or the first impression, is the right thing to do. Those who give this advice invariably have had one life-shaping experience, or maybe a few, where they did or didn't follow their gut, and it worked out to be noteworthy. Either it went well, or it didn't. But how does that help you? Relying on first impressions solely could be a poor way to look at things. For example, there are people who are highly skilled at creating a fantastic image of themselves, especially when you first meet them. They will engender large amounts of trust, they'll be very likable, and they may indeed get you and others to do things for them. It later emerges that what they promised they would do, they don't, and your first impression, Freudian slip, was totally erroneous. So let's look at the fallibility of first impressions. There's a huge fallibility inbuilt within us as humans. Cortisol levels and adrenal levels can sometimes cause a normally regular person to act a bit short-tempered, or on the other end of the spectrum, maybe even shy. Either way, when one person has had a bad day, or even a bad week, potentially going through a short period of crisis in their life, maybe something isn't going quite planned, is it fair that we, and it's natural, especially when we think about first impressions, to judge their personality in a snapshot? So, have we ever had that bad day or that bad week? I know I have, and I think it's really important to think about the context of first impressions. So what about first impressions versus track record? I think they're almost on a different scale. So first impressions in a way could be different from track record. So charisma is quite important, and if you want to be, especially if you want to be in show business or a politician, that said, how important is it to secure a job or to secure the partner of your dreams? For many people, they trust a charismatic, friendly figure, sometimes to their own detriment. For example, how many marriages start well but sometimes could end in divorce, for example, due to the duo being possibly poorly matched, yet there was a spark at the beginning. Taking the charisma out of the decision. The bigger the decision, the harder it is for one to step away from personalities and first impressions, to take the emotion out of it. Charisma and persuasion are without a doubt very influential and influencing skills, but if you're a hiring manager or a dating, it might be best to think about something slightly deeper than first impressions. For example, the obvious things really, that the job description or core values rather than charisma, and things that almost intrinsically, emotionally we're attracted to. So for example, in the dating context, if he or she is friendly and charismatic, maybe gorgeous, yet maybe a little bit impatient, which some people tend to ignore at the start, think about the following circumstances, and bear in mind this is all hypothetical. It's just to give, and it's a little bit exaggerated, just to give an impression of what can happen. You've been married for a few years, and you've got some kids, and this person that was charismatic at the start, that you instantly clicked with for various reasons. At 2 a.m. in the morning when the baby is crying, that sort of impatience that you once saw and ignored at the time because the first impression was so good, the charisma was so good, and the spark was so strong, you ignored it. If they're not around to get up early in the morning, they might not be that supportive, and that might cause friction later on. Well, this is an extreme example. While this is an extreme example, it's not that uncommon, and that's why first impressions can sometimes be misleading and often unhelpful. So, I think the first thing to say on that is that some of the things I'm talking about you won't agree with, and that's because contrarian thinking or counterintuitive thinking tends to be challenging. So you may instantly, whether it's right now or even later on, think that guy was talking nonsense, and that's completely fine. And these are just my thoughts, and I'm not going to spend too long talking about that, but I think it's normal to not agree with a lot of things I'm saying. So the next topic is called try it out and see how you feel. So how often have you said that to others or yourself? Try it out and see how you feel. See how it goes. There are many sort of variants on that sort of theme. See how you feel, see how it goes. Spoken in another way, we often sort of outsource our opinion of a thing to the future outcome or the future response by other people. So Warren Buffett, a sort of successful investor and business owner in the US, has a really interesting concept called scorecards. And he talks about how some people have an outer scorecard, and that's essentially where they sort of ascribe more value to what others think, their perception of themselves, versus the inner scorecard, whereby people are taking decisions based on internal values. So how does that sort of relate to this? Well, for example, if someone has an outer scorecard and they're trying to choose a career or choose a life partner, and they're having a discussion with a friend, a colleague, or a family member, and that person says, well, see how you feel, or something along those lines, they might be outsourcing that decision based on two factors, that person's feelings, or their feelings in the future. And I think that's kind of a little bit dangerous, and not necessarily dangerous, but dangerous in terms of decision making. Or misleading is probably the better word. So there's Noah Harari, famous Israeli author, publisher of *Sapiens* and 21 Lessons. In his book, he talks about how we pick and choose identities to base our decisions on, almost like a point that we go back to. And we sort of weight decisions based on all of these identities and values. And when you're sort of seeing how we feel at any point, there's so many different factors that go into decision makings. I'm not a neuro psychologist or anything like that, so I'm not going to talk about all the different factors, but there has to be thousands. There's many, many different factors to go into making a decision. So sort of seeing how one feels, there's pioneering research at the moment actually in terms of the neural link between the stomach and the mind. So, I mean, I'm not going to go too much into that, but I think there's a lot of different sort of factors. So how does this relate to trying new things or stopping doing other things? For example, starting a new career, moving country, etc., etc. So seeing how it goes could be problematic, right? Most people make emotionally led decisions. It's very uncommon for somebody to, I'm not saying that it's very rare, but it is uncommon for people to use sort of spreadsheet, pros and cons approach, do it over many weeks. I know I do, but I know that's very unusual. So we sort of developed, thinking about it from a sort of historical point of view, we sort of developed to be social animals, caring about what other people think. And no doubt, this sort of meant that how others felt and how we feel in reaction to their reactions, if you like, in relation to their reactions, impacts our decisions. Historically, if we think about it from a historical point of view, sort of modern society versus hunter-gatherer societies, when one wanted to play, a younger person potentially wanted to play with lions or wolves or hyenas in the field or on the beaches, savannas, etc. They may have been disregarded by others or scorned, etc., and be told it's silly and dangerous. And they would have felt feelings of fear, and that sort of passed through, I guess, in generations. But let's think about the modern life. Like in modern life, the risks of modern life are much less defined and empirically less dangerous. So while at the same time, opportunity for things to do, opportunities for choices, has multiplied. So if we think about it, the choices a 25-year-old male or female in a hunter-gatherer society had compared to now. If we think about it, like the choices will be, times by 1,000 compared to then. So how many hunter-gatherers studied another language, even another tribal language? If we think about it, they may have possibly, very, very few people may have learned the neighbouring language, one neighbouring tongue, possibly. So, but what about now? Any person with access to Wi-Fi can learn any language, including dead languages. So that's just languages, but if we think about every single field, it's really sort of staggering. Let's just look at one other one, the job market. So likewise, in the job market, there are now thousands of different jobs, different types of jobs, and you can even create your own jobs nowadays with modern society. Hunter-gatherers had a handful of options, and no doubt many were handed down. Your father was a carpenter or a butcher or whatever, and he taught you those skills. I'm sorry, I'm talking in gender terms here, but I think in this topic it sort of makes sense. Parents taught their kids skills, and then they went on invariably to do that for the next generation. The skills were passed down. But most risks nowadays, they're not mortal risks. So, if your children are going to sort of play in the proverbial field or savannah, it will be in a park, and they won't probably be attacked by hyenas or lions. But we still get the same sort of fears, and the sort of transgenerational stress and adrenal responses are really from that period of time. So the conclusion is really there's two sort of conclusions here. First, I'd say looking at a pros and cons approach instead of seeing how you feel, and that nothing in life is fixed, and you're not a hunter-gatherer. So that's try out and see how you feel. Another concept which has sort of come about and sort of I've come into contact with recently was about spontaneity. So Spontaneity, be more spontaneous. That's what someone said. So I think that there's a lot of super achievers or high achievers, you know, in career, in music, in sports, or in other fields, potentially even, you know, in dance and athletics. That many people believe that it's a one-off effort or ingrained genetic ability or luck that governs output. Occasionally we think that they have to give up a lot of things. A few months ago, I spoke with a project manager at a job I was at, and we were getting on, and she sort of invited me to go out for lunch, and we got chatting about sort of spontaneity as a general concept. And it turns out that I've been less and less spontaneous over the years. And at this sort of lunch, I was made to feel that this was a really bad thing, that you know, I was way too planned, and you know, I should let go a little bit and be more spontaneous, etc., etc. So this sort of got me thinking about this. At the time we were discussing it, spontaneity sort of had an almost superior sort of mythic status, a higher level of fun. Having like a fun thing or something fun to do was great. But if it was planned before, it was somehow not as good. And if it was unplanned for some reason, you know, this mythic reason, if it was unplanned, it was even better. Even though the output was exactly the same, you know, you'd have fun. So the result is the same, but the journey is different, and it's almost a performance. This idea of spontaneity, the ability to conjure up fun, and as if from nowhere. But how often is that the case? You know, the cool new place you stumble upon is often in a sort of trendy up and coming area where you know, where upstarts can afford rent, so they can take a risk and try a new, different concept, thereby increasing the chances that you will sort of stumble upon that cool new place and spontaneously decide to go in. The other example we talked about at lunch was travel. My lunch companion mentioned how she'd met up with an ex over lunch, making me squirm a bit, and you'll see why in a moment. And she decided at this lunch with this chap, on a whim, to go on holiday that very weekend together with this ex. It was implied that they had a spontaneously fantastic time at this weekend. I was then informed that they ended their thing and never spoke after that. And that's really when it hit me. Spontaneity is often referenced in a way to mean something in between sort of lucky fun, i.e. finding that cool new bar, that cool new film or play or book or whatever it might be, and sort of pleasure or even hedonism or hedonistic luck. That fits at the time. So for example, you know, a hot weekend booked on a whim with an ex. So how does this sort of relate to, you know, how would I look at this really in a sort of counterintuitive or contrarian way? I'd sort of say that nowadays I think there's a lot less spontaneity in the world in terms of, you know, online we have things like TripAdvisor, Facebook, Google, Instagram, and even if we think it's spontaneous, and we may have heard of the area that people are talking about, we may have even you know, seen someone comment or talk about it online, etc., etc. So I think that the summary for me is that I think making a plan and being flexible is actually okay, and sort of idealising or lionifying, that's probably not even a word, but lionising the sort of topic or concept of spontaneity is probably not the best thing. Next topic is slightly different.
Can we make any comments?
So there's going to be questions and answers in about 5 minutes. We've only got 3 topics left, and they're actually really short.
Could we be a bit spontaneous?
Exactly. So the next topic is more about numbers. So it's called Excel is mind-numbingly boring. So when I was a teenager, I thought numbers were pretty useless, and I thought the world of numbers and suits was just not for me. Even in my 20s, I resisted office work, and I still held on to these sort of interesting views that numbers and spreadsheets were sort of mind-numbingly boring, useless, etc., etc. I not only found them useless, but I found them boring and a sort of the antithesis of where I wanted my life to go. I was interested in high adrenaline things. I liked table tennis when I was 12. I was into skateboarding at 15, and then I started breakdancing at 19. So even being inside at that time bored me. Unless I was sort of flipping and spinning and doing all those sorts of things, I was really interested. But spreadsheets, it was just so far away. I thought it was crazy. Suits, not the sort of thing I wanted to be doing. I didn't want to wear a suit. I didn't want to touch Excel. I thought it was insane. I thought it was boring and was going to lead me nowhere. So I was somewhat narrow-minded. That was when I was younger. So later, I changed my mind a little bit. Let's explore why I, and a lot of people, think that spreadsheets are boring. For one, they're coupled with what some believe to be boring professions, accountancy, etc. That's some people, by the way, not me. We might think that once one learns Excel, you sort of tape to it, you tie to it for life. 8 hours a day of Excel, numbers, spreadsheets, that sort of thing. It's common to think of a sort of stereotypical accountant, risk averse, bean counting, maybe having a boring personality. That's sort of how I thought when I was younger. So I thought that office work and working on computers was just sort of dull. I didn't realise that computers can and do change people's lives. Spreadsheets, in a way, are a tool. It's like an artist who can't paint. They might be a good drawer, but if they can't paint, some might, including the artist, see it as a lost opportunity. Computers are life changers, and spreadsheets are just another tool. Singing the praises of spreadsheets. Spreadsheets are wonderful. I've moved well beyond the simplistic notion that spreadsheets are boring, because when I learned to use them, I quickly realised they could be used to tell the future, your own future. The modern equivalent of your own personal fortune teller, and it's free. So, I'm not going to go into the details of why I believe this, but it's very easy to do forecasts on spreadsheets. It's very easy to add up things and to do budgets, etc., and to improve one's own view of the current situation and to come up with predictions, etc. So if you don't want to see into the future, then definitely stay away from spreadsheets. If you don't want to know how you're doing, stay away from spreadsheets. If you don't want to better understand your financial situation, maybe how you're doing in terms of performance at work, maybe improve it, and stay the hell away from spreadsheets. It's kind of related a little bit. Investing is only for the pros. The investment world is propagating and manufacturing the idea that investment is complicated. Fund managers complicate things, and they sometimes make the concepts around finance complicated and exotic. It's all tough. Investing is as basic maths, mixed in with a slight touch of maybe futurism, or put it another way, common sense. Exceptional investors. Many people think you need to be exceptional to invest. The truth is mind-bogglingly the opposite. If I showed you successful investors, most I've met are calm, tend to be older folks, and who've basically invested steadily. They didn't have spectacular jobs, they lived somewhere, sometimes modestly, but they've all done exceedingly well financially. They are far from exceptional. They're not, maths or science whizzes, and they talk in very simple, basic terms. I would say they're just like me and you. They have their eye on the prize, with the correct time horizon as well. Marathon, not a race. Investing is commonly thought to be exotic, complicated, and exciting. It's nothing of the above. How many people have come to you at a cocktail party, dinner party, where someone has whispered a stock that is bound to go up, or indeed a cryptocurrency a la recent history? I know I wrote this when cryptocurrencies were going up. I believe now they're completely crashed, but it's interesting context there. So, when should numbers be exciting? Why should numbers be exciting? If you think about it, your life should be exciting. Numbers should be numbers, and maybe they should be boring. Your finances should be boring. It's contrarian to think that not everyone is a millionaire contrarian investor. Indeed, nor am I. Not yet. These things take time. It's boring, but it works. Just the last topic. It's called looking the part. Starting a new role, it's common for people to say to one that you should look the part. Indeed, I've started a few roles as a consultant, anxious to look the part and fit into company culture as fast as possible to be and to feel totally integrated. It's no big surprise that many people that it's a good idea, especially coupled with the unusually disproportionate weight ascribed to first impressions. Nevertheless, it's no bad thing to create a good first impression. But what if that's all we are doing, perpetuating a good first impression? I'm just classed as a millennial by most definitions, although I don't really feel like one. The only real time I feel like a millennial is being a relatively early adopter of new technology. And I understand that anyone can and does become an early adopter, so I hardly qualify. But I was fairly early into one of these platforms. Many years ago, a friend mentioned a new app for photographers who wanted to take photos with filters, making work that used to take many, many hours, minutes work. He admitted it wasn't perfect, but made for taking interesting holiday pics and creative shots, and it was really easy to use. The app in question was made by 10 people and ballooned in popularity far outside the narrow field of photography and travel snap enthusiasts. In 2012, Instagram was bought by bigger brother Facebook for $1 billion. It quickly grew more and more attractive and attracting younger audiences intent on taking pictures of not what was out there, but flipping the script, somewhat contrarianly, to take a picture of themselves. The selfie was popularised in 2013, and many celebrities have now started doing this, including, I heard footballers are mandated at certain clubs for footballers, every game are mandated instead to write, to do signatures and autographs. Now they're mandated to go to the audience and take selfies with them. Indeed, even presidents and prime ministers do this sort of thing. However, many people fall for the reflection in the mirror, in the water, their own image, sorry. The selfie reigns supreme. But only what they see counts, only what we share. What about the ends? What about the real story, the nuance, what really happens, what happened? It's fairly common now to find young people in the cities feeling incredibly lost. Anxiety and depression are on the rise. We scroll feeds of narcissists who seem, from what we can see or tell, to be doing so well and feeling so happy about it. But this is really sort of at odds with the data that's coming out about anxiety and depression. Meanwhile, we worry about the world, ourselves and meaning. Nihilistic writing from the smart middle, from the likes of Elon Musk and Harari, plus populist rhetoric from maniacs from both sides of the political spectrum are feeding the meaning void, this lack of substance. There's a panic and a general concern about where we're going, but nobody knows where we're going. Never trust what you can see. People like to tell a story about themselves. They like to look the part. They do this in greater or lesser degrees in a variety of things, but everything directed out into the world externally, what they buy, how they look, what they say. However, what people wear and what people buy says a lot about them to the wider audience, and I think it's really important to think about looking the part versus being the part. Think backwards, and instead of looking the part, be the part. Thank you. So these were the topics that I covered. So yeah, opening the floor to questions.
You talked about spontaneity. You didn't say whether it was good or bad, but you never talked about risk. And I think that life is really boring if there is no risk. If there's no, but this is my personal opinion, there's no spontaneity. This concept of planning everything, you talked about Excel, everything being well thought out. My personal life is a happening, and it's much more stressful having a life that's a happening because you never quite know what's going to happen, or you might miss something that you should have done or might have done better or whatever. But it's much more fun.
Okay, it's a very interesting point. So I think they're not very interested in sort of risk-taking activities, skateboarding.
I don't mean your sort of risk-taking. I'm talking about doing something spontaneously which may not be the great decision because you haven't thought about it long enough, you've done it like that. But nevertheless, I think it's still worth doing. I'm not talking about standing on the edge of a mountain and falling off or whatever. I'm talking about risks just by not planning or thinking carefully through something.
I think
Could you give us an example
Yeah, exactly.
of
There's different types of.
your life?
Yeah.
What, you know, because
Yeah.
if you say not jumping off the mountain, then
Okay. Well, this is an actually quite a big one, but I don't regret it. People go, do you regret it?
I hope it's no longer big.
I was in Israel. I
Yes.
was introduced to somebody who is in the property business. I had no intention of buying anything in Israel. Okay? And I said, this guy, show me what's going on here. It was in Ashkelon, masses and masses of building. I'm just interested.
Sure.
In 2 hours, after he showed me something, which wasn't even built, I mean, he just showed me I signed on the dot. He wasn't forcing me to do anything.
You
I
had
just,
money
I
in the
just,
bank.
well, I hadn't even, you see, I hadn't even thought this through. Something must have been going through subconsciously.
Yeah.
I signed. I've had problems because the water comes through this property. This is Israel, of course. You know. So there are problems ongoing. But I don't regret my decision. But it was spontaneous. I took a risk. Not a risk in terms of course, I couldn't have signed something, I hadn't had the money to buy it.
Yeah.
But I took a risk without, because I haven't gone to Israel. I'm planning to buy something.
Sure. I think
So-
so. I think we've got the example. So I think it's really interesting. So let's take it back a step and think about the process. So an opportunity has come about that's unplanned, and then you've got the options are you go with it or you don't.
Or you think about it for a
or
week
there's
or
maybe a
so.
third option. Yeah, you think about it and you plan and then go for it. I think so. There's a common neural sort of pattern that people go through, and they talk about sort of outcome bias. So it's very often linked to spontaneous decision making.
What was the word you just
Outcome bias. So, for example, when people are making investment decisions about taking financial risks, and this is an example of taking financial risks, when things go well, they're happy to talk about it, and when things go badly, they're not so happy to talk about it, and it's often about whether they're happy about it is based on the outcome.
But the outcome's been really bad. 5 years ago, a court case involved. Where other people might think it's bad. They're all going, is the court case still going on? I couldn't really care less. I don't actually live there permanently, so it's a bit annoying. So I'm just trying to, say to you what the process that went on inside me was not in front of my brain, but something must have been happening subconsciously for me to have actually taken this decision.
Okay.
Sorry, but what's your name?
My name is Jake.
I don't believe this was spontaneous. If these ladies from a society were buying properties good, were Israel investment, if she's got money
It's a
in the
good point.
bank,
It's a good
it's
point.
not that
But in
spontaneous.
terms of
If I from
One second,
Romania
guys.
or something came and
It's a good point. We've
Yes,
actually
but I
got.
hadn't planned
One second,
to
we've
do
actually
anything
got
of the
other
sort.
questions.
You
I
are-
think just to be fair to other people in the
So
room, I think we should.
You asked
I
me for
can
an
take the point
example,
on.
so I'm just.
I take the point on. People can make financial. They make financial decisions in a planned way or an unplanned way. I prefer the planned way, and it can do better if you.
Spontaneity here.
It's personal
You
choice.
go to the
Personal
session
choice.
that's in number 35 or
Okay.
whatever, and you decide to divert and go to
Okay,
room 1.
well, we're gonna move on.
That's still spontaneous. isn't
Okay.
it? You know.
Yeah, I think the issue here is about, this is context about spontaneity and indeed about planning for serendipity. You know, the issue is you can be prepared for serendipity as in, I have an amount of money, let's take investment, right? And I'm not looking at this moment to invest because I don't see it, but if an opportunity comes out, I make myself available for that opportunity to throw into something, which
Yeah.
means I have money available,
Yeah.
and I do it. Now my issue is, if people can choose to act in any way they choose to, it would be irresponsible if you haven't got the means to back up your investment. So if you threw money in it, you're prepared to lose the money. Now, to me,
Can I throw that back
if
at
there
you?
are consequences to your actions which you've not thought through, which will not just impact on you, impact on other people,
Yes.
I call that reckless, because you've actually now taken a risk.
But
which
what
is
you've
beyond.
done there, that's a really good, interesting point. I think it sort of links to the previous point that if you are planning to have a percentage of your money invested in unknown opportunities. It's a sort of plan. So saying to oneself, 10% of my investable funds will be invested in unknown opportunities in the future. When those opportunities come in, I think that is a kind of plan. And what you described about in terms of having the net outcome of impacting other people as being reckless behaviour, I completely agree with it.
The other thing I wanted to say was equally about, I actually think as a society, we've become extremely risk averse in all sorts of ways.
Yeah.
And I think it's a very bad thing. Yeah. I think people are less prepared, whether it be in relationships or in jobs. They are so utterly cautious to such a level that they are not prepared because not every box has been ticked.
I'd agree.
And I think that is a real danger to our society, or indeed, equally, if things don't quite work to the way they do, they're equally quick to dismiss and say, well, we don't work it through, let's dump this, or dump the investment, or dump the relationship, or dump the bit. And I think that is a society which has been bred through the sort of world that we've created, generated. It's a world which sees everything as can be easily boxed into black and white.
Yes.
And I think life is far more grey in that way, nuanced in that way, and I think that is a problem of modern society, which I don't think in previous eras, and I think choice and the amount of things available to us are such that we seem to think we've got that.
I'm sorry, but as a mother, I am worried. You obviously are responsible and you like to balance that with that. But even my 17-year-old man says, look, my friend said he goes to India and has he grows funny mushrooms and makes money and that. Will I like that kind of decision, knowing that wasting 5 years of his life then would really put him back? You said 25 is the age of choosing. No, 7. In our society, the choice is done at 7 when you go to school.
Okay.
One thing that's occurred to me, because I have thought about this sort of stuff a lot, and this is my husband Josh, and we're the sort of people who will make every decision by looking at every eventuality and putting it in spreadsheets, and I'm an accountant. One thing that has occurred to me is that one of the reasons that people are so risk averse this way is we've got massive access to information, and it's very easy to access information. It's very easy just on anything, just to Google everything about it and become experts on that really minor stuff. And the reason this hit me was because I've made friends with a couple of people in the Haredi community who don't have access to this information.
Okay.
And one of the things that struck me was, and I just said to them, well, gosh, that was a massive risk you took, or, and they didn't understand the risk. So I think this is an inevitable consequence of just this massive amount of information we all now have access to.
That's an interesting point. So I'm going to take those 2 points. I agree with you on that. I think there's a certain personality type who gets into analysis paralysis. They want to get lots and lots and lots and lots of information, and they take the decision of inaction. So I think action or inaction, either way, is a decision, and whether people are happy with the decision is completely separate. And I agree with you that nowadays there is that compulsion to feel. There's almost an anxiety to feel like I haven't researched something enough. And so there's that compulsion to keep researching, ad infinitum. So that's interesting. On the point of choosing careers very young, I think that, I don't know how many people in the room here are Harari book readers. I think he's fantastic. A lot of his thoughts are very counterintuitive. But he was talking about how society is speeding up. So I'm very non-traditional, and I've changed my career a couple of times. And he's talking about the speed of change of modern life, and he's suggesting, and I think I agree with him, that the speed of change is increasing. And he's suggesting that every 5 to 6 years, people will need to reinvent themselves. So the idea of choosing a career, early, let's just say at 16, by the time you finish university, you need to retrain. So, and I think that time is probably coming with the convergence of a number of different trends, automation, AI, etc. We're going to need to keep reinventing ourselves.
Although I challenge that and say I'm an accountant and I do corporate taxes, right? So you are boxing in a very such boring
No, and I can see that you're not a typical good accountant.
but I think I read his book and I sort of disagree with that, because in some ways, and part of me would like to just sort of do something completely different. But because I'm working corporate tax in a bank in London, and I'm paid a certain amount of money, and I've got a mortgage and kids, there's something about like the setup that I'm in, as in earning X amount of money, and also not having to work in the evenings, which is deeply convenient to me. So I read his book and said, like, that's very nice, but I just don't see how that can fit into real life and into like real reality.
Well, okay.
You know, because
I see what you're saying. I think that's a different. We can talk about that after. I think.
Yeah. No, it's just yeah. Absolutely.
No, it's interesting. It's very interesting. I want to just go on to the Jewish topics, because I did say that there would be some Jewish topics, and I think it's worthwhile we touching a little bit on those. So there's just 3 or 4 topics. They're not as conscriptive as the others. I haven't written them out, but I wanted to talk about them, and I wanted to talk about the first is Shabbat. I think that Shabbat in itself as a concept is a little bit contrarian, because in the modern world, in the modern world, I guess there's lots of things